Welcome to AM Best Audio.
As cyber threats grow more interconnected, newly disclosed software vulnerabilities are exposing how quickly digital risk can cascade. Events like React to Shell highlight the outsized impact supply chain cyber exposures can have, especially on small and mid-sized businesses, intensifying concerns around business interruption, aggregation risk, and the evolving role of cyber insurers in strengthening resilience. I'm Lori Chortis for AM Best Audio, and joining us now to discuss that is Joe Toomey. He's Vice President of Underwriting Security at Coalition. Joe, welcome. Such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invite, Lori. I appreciate it.
So, Joe, can you tell us a bit about React to Shell and what the rise of vulnerabilities like it reveals about aggregate cyber risk across the insurance market?
Sure. I think I'll try to answer those two parts separately. So React to Shell was a recent vulnerability that was disclosed and received a lot of attention from threat actors at the beginning of December of last year. It's a vulnerability that affects server-side React. React is an open source framework. And I think there was initially a fair amount of confusion among the broader computer ecosystem around what exactly was affected by the vulnerability when it was first announced. It's important for context to understand that React itself is the most broadly used front-end library for building web applications in the world. If you use a web application, odds are good that it is written using React front-end. The vulnerability, though, is in React server-side components, and the majority of applications that are written using React front-end do not use React server-side components. So, the sort of this could be the most catastrophic vulnerability to ever be disclosed. Initial reaction was, I think a little overblown, but pretty quickly understood and quieted down by cybersecurity folks saying, okay, look, it's not just React, it's React server components. There is a framework called Next.js that uses React server components in all their applications. And that really was where we saw the most attention from threat actors. Because all Next.js applications at the time of the disclosure were vulnerable to this. And it was, CVSS 10.0 is the highest severity score that a vulnerability can receive. It basically means like all the bad answers are yes, everything terrible can happen. But, Coalition, we apply a stricter lens in looking at vulnerabilities as they're disclosed. And we did identify this as one that could potentially impact policyholders badly, and we responded accordingly. So that's a little bit about React to Shell. I think it's interesting to note how quickly it went from disclosure to exploitation. The researcher who first identified the vulnerability responsibly disclosed it to Meta, and there were a few days during which it was embargoed, and fixes were made and fixes were distributed. Particularly to Vercel, which is the most common vendor for hosting Next.js applications. There was a little bit of whispering happening in the cybersecurity network about there's a 10.0 vulnerability that's going to be disclosed soon in React server components, but the actual disclosure happened on December 3rd. Threat actors immediately began scanning and fingerprinting, trying to find all the systems that were running, React server components and Next.js at that time. But our honeypots indicated that they didn't have a working exploit yet. So they were sort of fishing and getting prepared to launch attacks as soon as they got their hands on a working exploit. And also, of course, in the background, trying to develop one. Of course, since then, people have applied the patch. Coalition spent a lot of time working with our policyholders. In fact, picking up the phone and calling them to say, hey, you're vulnerable, you need to patch now. The first working exploit, there were a few AI generated exploits that didn't actually work that dropped the same day, but the first working exploit came out the day after. And shortly after the working exploit was released, we saw evidence in our honeypots of threat actors actively trying to exploit it. We redoubled our efforts to reach out to our policyholders, and I think we had a very good response. To your second question about the rise of vulnerabilities like this and what it reveals about aggregate cyber risk, I would say open source frameworks in general are really good in many ways. They certainly accelerate the pace with which you can deploy an application in the internet age, where you're expected to just be able to pump out code and applications very quickly. There's a funny cartoon called XKCD. There's an XKCD comic that talks about this. It's called Dependency, and it has this, if you can picture it, stack of blocks all kind of precariously stacked on one another. It goes quite high, and the top of it is labeled all modern digital infrastructure. And then there's one little thin piece that's on the right side, barely holding up everything above it. And it says, a project some random person in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining since 2003. I think that there's a lot of truth to that, right? In this case, React is maintained by companies that invest in it, Meta for one. But the truth is, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and sometimes those giants are going to roll an ankle, and we all have to figure out what happens when that occurs. And I think at the end of the day, you take the good with the bad. As from an insurance perspective, I would say we collect as much data as we can. We model and account for aggregation in our underwriting and pricing, and we have really good systems in place to respond when we need to be reactive, no pun intended.
Jill, why are small and mid-sized businesses often the most exposed to emerging cyber vulnerabilities?
Sure. I mean, I might reframe this a little bit. Like, I wouldn't say a given company that is a small or mid-sized business is necessarily more likely to be exposed than a large company. I would say, generally speaking, of course, there are lots more small and mid-sized businesses than there are large. And that's why within our own book, we saw the majority of exposed policyholders were small and mid-sized business, just because that's a much larger component of our book. But I would say, from a framing standpoint, that small and mid-sized businesses are the least defended in general, right? Like, if you're a Fortune 500 company, you don't just have a CISO. Like, you have a whole team of people who are working on defending your company and understanding what your risks are and responding to those risks quickly. If you're a small business, you don't have a CISO, you don't have a security team, you don't have anyone who's keeping their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the cyber market, what's happening in the, from a threat actor standpoint. And so, companies like Coalition in particular, we have expertise that, small, medium businesses don't. And of course, we have a really well-aligned set of incentives that make us want to make sure that our policyholders are well protected. We have a process that we call 0-day alerts that we activate when we believe that there is a vulnerability that is either being exploited in the wild right now, or we believe, in our professional opinion, that it will be exploited imminently. And we activated that process for React to Shell. We frankly, we do it a lot, but most of our policyholders don't know, because the vast majority of alerts that we send go to a small number of policyholders, typically on average double digits, not triple digits. But those that we do notify generally are unaware that thing is happening and that they are exposed, and tend to be really appreciative of the fact that we're watching their back and we have the data and the capabilities to identify it quickly and reach out to them to let them know so they can fix it.
Does React to Shell change how insurers view cyber risk aggregation across open source dependencies? And could it reshape coverage, pricing, or aggregation limits?
It's a really good question. Obviously I can't speak for all cyber insurers, but I would not say that React to Shell fundamentally changes. Certainly not how Coalition views aggregation. I think if you look back a few years, and I'm sure you remember the Log4Shell vulnerability and the exploitation of that. I think from an impact standpoint, like time will tell, but I'm certain that the impact from Log4Shell will have been far greater than the impact from React to Shell. If Log4Shell didn't wake you up as an insurer, I suppose, this probably won't be the wake up call either. If you think you can just, build actuarial tables that will accurately model the dynamic nature of the internet without collecting data and being able to do the types of analysis that we do at Coalition, then this probably isn't the one that changes it. I would say from Coalition's perspective, we collect a lot of data around aggregation risk. We include that information in our not only in our risk selection, but also in our surplus lines pricing model, and we reevaluate it and we change the way that we manage it continuously, right? And so it's certainly, I think, well understood. Coalition's not the only company that understands that data collection can help make better risk decisions, better pricing decisions. And so, like, I don't think necessarily it's a wake up call, but for sure it continues to reemphasize the point that open source dependencies and vulnerabilities in not only technology stacks like React, but also even in things like cloud vendors, right? Amazon has an outage and that reverberates. Yesterday, Microsoft had a prolonged outage on Office 365. And so I think these are things that smart insurance companies need to be able to understand and model and use for risk selection and cat modeling and pricing and all of those things.
Customize your data experience. BestLink now offers an interactive company dashboard that provides company-level intelligence in a fast, user-friendly interface featuring interactive tables, charts, and Sparkline performance histories. Customize the dashboard tiles to prioritize the insurer ratings, data, and analytics that best support your workflow. AM Best. Our insight, your advantage.
Just expanding a bit on some of the things you shared and talked about earlier, Joe, how is Coalition helping clients reduce exposure to React to Shell and similar vulnerabilities?
Great question. I could talk about this all day. I would say it's a multi-pronged approach. First, we take a proactive approach that starts with risk selection when we're underwriting an account for the first time. We make an assessment of the cyber hygiene and the cyber posture of that prospective policyholder, and that often leads to conversations. Sometimes things are great and we're like, would love to go on risk with you. Sometimes things are not great. And we may have a conversation with that prospect to say, here are things that we'd like to see you improve, potentially before we're willing to insure you. And even at times, we are not willing to insure you, but here's a really nice PDF that says why. And hopefully you take that seriously. But that we're not done assessing the cyber risk of those who become policyholders when the underwriting is done and we bind. We continue to scan our policyholders and look at non-scan based things, API integrations for cloud-based services, and provide kind of a holistic picture of what we believe your cyber health is. We give all policyholders an attack surface monitoring platform that shows them our view of that with a nice health score that kind of says, you look great, or things aren't so good. And, that front homepage gives you an action plan. Here are the things we think you should fix first to make this score go up and, increase your confidence that you are better secured, right? There are no silver bullets in security, right? So it's not as though if you got a score of 100 from us that we would be saying there's no chance you're going to get owned. For sure, you still could, right? But beyond the proactive, we also have a reactive response that I mentioned earlier with our 0-day alerts, right? So we started out doing 0-day alerts a few years ago, and they were pretty infrequent, and now we do them quite often. I have a team of researchers who jump on news coming from the InfoSec, all the places that you would go to find out about what the latest issues are in security. And, we first thing we do is we assess, like, does this meet our criteria? And often things don't, right? Usually things don't. There are tens of thousands of CVEs issued every year, and almost all of them we don't alert on, right? But when we see something that is network accessible, that does not require authentication, that does not require user interaction, that's the type of criteria where we say, oh, okay, this may be something we need to actually do proactive outreach about. Proactive, I guess, in the sense that hopefully you haven't been compromised yet. But and usually that's in the form of an email to the security contact and the policyholder, copying the broker. Very infrequently, although React was an example of this, we do actually pick up the telephone. I can really only think of maybe 3 or 4 times that we've done that since I joined Coalition almost 4 years ago. And in those cases, it's basically a judgment call of, like, this really could be catastrophic. And when we do it, it's all hands on deck. It's not just the researchers on my team. We literally will say, like, if you have security background, jump in. We have, in the case of React, we notified over 200 policyholders and picked up the phone. And the majority of them were really grateful for the outreach. And I'm highly confident that we deflected some claims and saved some people from having a really bad time.
Joe, how are cyber threats becoming more interconnected across industries, supply chains, and insurance portfolios?
Yeah, all the time, right? I think, most organizations that have software systems that are running on the internet are building on a pretty small set of common technologies and a pretty small set of common vendors, right? The different SaaS providers, the different identity providers, different open source frameworks. This will continue to happen, and it's what we should expect. And so, yes, there is aggregation risk. Coalition, we also have a reinsurance offering at Coalition, and so we do a lot of modeling of this type of aggregation. We call them aggregation technologies and vectors, or ATVs. We look at this not only across our own book to understand what our cat risk looks like as an MGA, but also for companies that we provide reinsurance for, particularly, stop loss, non-proportional reinsurance. And we share with them actually a web application where they can go and look at our assessment of their shared risks, what their aggregation risks look like. You have this percent of your book is running in AWS US East 1 and does not have multi-region capability to protect them against a single region outage, for example, right? I think the interconnectedness, the shared risk, that it's going to continue. And I think from an insurance standpoint, smart companies will do whatever they can to collect data to inform their decisions on, do we want to try and reduce the amount of this that we have on our book? Do we want to price for it? And what do we want to do proactively to try and make sure that risk doesn't turn into loss?
How should insurers think about resilience and risk concentration when widely used digital tools become points of failure? And what role can cyber insurers play in early detection and rapid response?
Well, I would say how should insurers think about it? I think they have two choices. They can try and run things like a traditional insurance company and see how that works out for them from a loss ratio standpoint. Or they can follow our lead and try to build systems that can respond at internet speed, pre-gather contacts for responsible parties in the IT and security areas for your insureds so that you can be nimble and have a threat intel apparatus that can be reactive when necessary, right? Because the truth of the matter is, I can look at technology and say, I think that technology is risky, but we're an insurance company, right? We're in the business of taking risk. I could say to you, for example, I hate SSL VPNs, and that's a true statement, right? Like if we look at our book and we look at the likelihood that a policyholder is going to suffer a loss, and consider whether or not they're running an SSL VPN exposed to the internet or not, right? The truth is they're dramatically more likely to suffer a claim, right? Like 4 times more likely. Now, does that mean Coalition won't insure people who run SSL VPNs? No, it doesn't. We have a substantial percentage of policyholders who run SSL VPNs. So what do we do about it? Well, we try to do things proactively. We get them to attest to running MFA, enforcing MFA on their VPNs, which helps some of the attacks, right? It's gonna prevent brute forcing. It's going to prevent credential stuffing, largely. And then we also invest a lot in trying to figure out, like, might this SSL VPN be vulnerable, right? Typically, those devices aren't going to tell you what version they're running, unfortunately for us. If they told us the version, we could easily say, oh, this is a vulnerable version, you have to patch it. But typically, they don't leak that information, which means we have to try and be clever to figure out, if possible, still, can we tell what version it is? And if we do, and we've done this for a number of them, then we can say, hey, you're running a vulnerable version. We won't be insuring you until you patch. Or you were already on risk, but we found out you didn't patch and it's being exploited in the wild, and we can tell you you're vulnerable, you need to patch now. And then kind of that, nimble, reactive apparatus to say, okay, there is something being exploited in the wild and we know the risk is on our books. How quickly can we collaborate with our policyholders, who effectively are our partners in trying to make sure that they don't get owned, to share with them what they need to do to remediate the vulnerability and hopefully prevent it from turning into a loss and a claim and the worst day in somebody's professional career.
Looking ahead, Joe, how must the insurance industry now adapt to manage increasingly frequent, widespread, and interconnected cyber disruptions?
Again, I feel like I'm going to repeat myself here, but hopefully you can infer from my answers how passionately I feel about this, right? It really has to be a combination of proactive and reactive, data-driven systems that help, one, reduce the amount of risk that insurers have on their books for things that are known to be risky, and then respond to emergent risks to try and reduce the impact of them. I'll be honest with you, like, if you had told me 10 years ago that I was going to be working at a cyber insurance company, I would have laughed in your face. I don't mean this in a bad way, but I never found insurance to be an interesting domain for me. I think cybersecurity is super interesting, right? I really like the cat and mouse. There are good guys, there are bad guys. We're the defenders. We're helping save people. That really gets me up in the morning. I'm like, let's go, right? But when you look at cyber insurance, I can actually say, in some ways, it feels even better to me working at a cyber insurance company that does this really well. And when I say this, I mean, if you look at metrics, our brag chart would say a coalition policyholder is 73% less likely to suffer a claim than our competitors based on publicly shared data, right? That makes me feel fantastic, right? And it's not like we're going to stop all the bad, right? There are going to be claims. We pay tons of claims, and we do a great job supporting our policyholders through that. But it does feel really good to know that the things that we're doing, that my team is doing, that Coalition is doing, reduce the likelihood that somebody's going to fall victim to one of these things. Reduces the number of people who end up dealing with a ransomware infection and, worrying about, am I going to lose my job? Is the company going to go under? All of those things. It really does feel good to feel like we're making a difference. That's the company motto is protecting the unprotected. And, I think we live it.
Joe, this has been so fascinating, so informative, and it has been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Greatly appreciate it.
I really, really appreciate the invite, Lori, and thanks so much for your time.
That was Joe Toomey, Vice President of Underwriting Security at Coalition. For AM Best Audio, I'm Lori Chortis.
Looking to get the full attention of the insurance industry? We have the platforms that will do just that. Whether it be AM Best TV, AM Best Audio, Best Review Magazine, or Best Day. Find out more by calling AM Best Advertising Sales at 908-439-2200, extension 5399, and have a great day.